Alright, welcome back. In part 1, we replaced our one server config with one for dev and one for prod, and we named them. We also created a render file that became the entry point for our dev server. We're going to start right where we left off in part 1, but if you need to catch up, check out HotServer. Now we've almost got SSR working in development. Let's keep at it. In the Webpack dev client, we have the HTML Webpack plugin. Let's comment that out right now. So when we save, it's recompiled. We can see we have a server bundle, and we no longer have an HTML. Cool. So what happens when we reload our browser? It looks like a node server without any routes. This is good. So what this means is we can hook up some new middleware in development that's going to serve our rendered page. So let's exit out. Let's install a new package. npm install Webpack hot server middleware. Now inside Express.js, let's pull that in at the top. Alright, so now that we have our HotServerMiddleware, let's head down here, and right above where it says middleware enabled, right underneath the Webpack hot middleware, let's do server use Webpack HotServerMiddleware, and let's give it both compilers. It'll go in and find the server one. But now that we have that set up, let's run npm run dev again and see what happens. Alright, we're going to take this error by error. Illegal operation on a directory. Now this one's pretty crazy, but what it tends to come down to is inside the Webpack dev server config, the entry point server is causing some problems. What we want instead is an entry point that's a plain string. Let's give it another go. Next error. Oh, forgot a comma. Next error. Looks good. Let's see what it looks like in the browser. Server compiler must export a function in the form of options request response. So it seems to be doing that, but we do have one problem. Here in the output area, we want to name the library target. It seems to be messing that up. So library target should be common JS2. And while we're at it, let's name this something, because now it's coming out as main bundle. Let's name it dev server bundle. Alright, so it's compiling successfully again. Let's see what it says in the browser. Boom. Done. We see that we have server-side rendering. Alright, let's check out our console to make sure. We have a warning here, which is target node has markup rendered by React, but there are unrelated nodes as well. It gives us a hint that this is mostly caused by white space inserted around the rendered markup. So back in our render.js, we can see that there's a white space around this render to string function. And that's what it's talking about. So if we take this out, be good to go again. So it recompiles. When we reload, we have two new warnings. So these are good warnings to have. We're almost there. So first, this is a React 16 warning. It wants us to replace React DOM render with hydrate. So that's happening in our app.js. We're rendering on the client side when we already have markup on the server side that we can use. So instead, we can use hydrate to give it all the events and state that it needs without re-rendering. So let's go back. We have one more warning, which is kind of a weird, tricky one. But it says that prop source did not match on the server and the client. So inside dev client, we have a file loader loading our JPEG image. And it doesn't have a /, but a / is being rendered nonetheless. So inside of our dev server, we also have a file loader. It's not admitting a file, but it is admitting a file path. So if you look at it, the file path is being emitted, but there's no / at the beginning. So I found this to be a weird discrepancy between client and server side using the file loader. But all you need to do to correct it is to add that /. So now when you save that, it recompiles. We need to reload our browser, and that's cleared up. So now you can see a / on the rendered markup matches the client side. So there's one more warning. Apparently main CSS is not coming down as CSS. If we look at it, it looks like the same response, and we're not getting it in our client side build. So that must be the problem. So why is that? So in Webpack dev client, we see that our CSS is still being output using the style loader. But because we're now rendering, and we're rendering a main CSS directly, we need it to be output using something more like what the server side is using, the extract text plugin. So we can take extract text plugin from the server side, and we just move it over to the client side. We're also going to need to grab it at the top, put it in at top, and the last thing is in the plugins. Just grab it from the plugins and give it to the client-side plugins. So now when this reruns, we can see we have our main CSS again. Back in the browser, main CSS is coming in no problem. All right, cool. So now we have proper dev server SSR. And if we make a change and save it, we can see that our hot module reloading is working just fine. Nice. Now what about prod? Let's exit out. Let's npm run prod. All right, so it's getting our pre-rendered function, which is not what we want. Let's get into the prod file. Inside express.js, we're requiring render, which is the entry file. We should require the output. So the output is over in build. And it's going to be called prod server bundle. Now let's grab that prod server. Now inside prod server, we need to do the same things. We need to make this into an object. We need to change env to production. And we need to make the entry just a plain string. We also want this to be render.js. Now let's call this prod server bundle. Let's make sure the library target is common.js too. Let's give it a go again. All right, so it can't find the module prod server bundle.js. What that means is that it hasn't been created when this line is hit. So what we need to do is we need to create it via the Webpack as a function. So let's add Webpack. Let's give it our configs. Config prod client and config prod server. Now we can run this by just calling run on this object. Now run is going to create those files, and at the end it's going to call this callback. So we'll make a function for it to be a callback. It's going to pass in an error if there's an error, and it's going to pass in a big object full of everything that Webpack has done, and it's called the stats. We looked at the stats a little bit in the bundle analyzer episode. So now inside this function, we're just going to move all of this stuff in there. So it'll be after this is built that it's required and then used as middleware. So now let's give this a shot. npm run prod. We may still have one more. Yep, we have one more function here. All right, so change that back to a object in Webpack prod client. What's next? Looks good. All right, so we reload, we see that prod is working as well. So how can we tell it's prod? Well, in the response headers, you should see the content encoding is broadly. That's the same for vendor bundle and main bundle as well. Okay, so we've come quite a long way. We're running this source server main file with both npm run prod and npm run dev. We're just using a different value for node env. And in express, this if statement tells us if we're in development or in production. In both cases, we've used Webpack as a function in node, passed it two config objects as an array. In development, we've passed the output of that to our middleware, and we've added a new piece of middleware. In production, we've run our static files, and at the end, we've required our prod server bundle as a piece of middleware so that we can incorporate things like Markdown and other file types. We then serve most of the static stuff out of the dist directory, and we serve our routing out of this piece of middleware, which we define in render. Render to string with approot will do the rest of the work. Now the rest of this section, we're going to hook up React Router so that approot has a number of pages that we can switch between. And we'll show how we can use dynamic imports to grab the JS and CSS necessary for those pages on demand. If you'd like to look at the final code, check out HotServer Final. Next, we're going to move ahead towards the ultimate setup by adding React Router. We'll hook into the server side, and finally we'll use dynamic imports to break our bundle into router-specific chunks. See you there.